So since I was asked to do a piece on texture, I thought we would do a little tiny bit of collage, and I'm going to actually use my art journal. So what I'm using is just an old magazine that I happen to have two of, and I actually journal in here, and I'll do all my art stuff. So I was going to just do a spread. So I went to a page that kind of has some really, really pretty florals and things already, because I'm going to go ahead and use florals just because I love florals. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to start with some Mod Podge or gel medium, whichever one you happen to have. And you want to make sure it's a matte one because you don't really want any of the glossy effect going on there. So I have a Mod Podge, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take a piece of cardstock, again with really pretty floral patterns, and I'm just going to start ripping it up into little tiny chunks. Doesn't matter what chunks you put it in, we're going to spread them around on the page and make them look really pretty, so you can chunk them up however you like. Once you get all your chunks done, you can start using your Mod Podge, and you're just going to go in here and make a very thin layer. You don't want a lot. Put your paper down, and then make sure you get all the liquid out of it. So you're just going to squeeze it. You can also use a brayer if you have one. You could use an old credit card, one of the catalysts, you know, just to kind of scrape it and make sure everything's nice and flat. I'm just going to keep on going. And you kind of just want to randomly spread them out and put them around the page wherever you think they would look best. And the reason that I love using magazines, old magazines, is because they actually come with already pre-built pages underneath here. So you get to use all these cool elements in your collage. You know, I have all these flowers and I have all these writings and texts and things like that. So it's kind of cool to just kind of incorporate those into your art journal page. So as you can see, I went through and I just put a couple extra spots of text in here just because I like the way that text looks in the final layers. This is just pieces of paper that I tore out of a magazine, so I'm just using some of the writing. It doesn't matter to me what it actually says because you'll barely see it. You'll just see little parts and pieces of it through there. So now that the collage piece is done, you're going to want to let this dry completely before you move on to your next step. Now that our collage layer is dry, it depends on how much Mod Podge or gel medium you use. It typically doesn't take very long. If you want to hurry up, you can also use a blow dryer or a very low heat gun and kind of just heat it up a little tiny bit. You want to make sure that you stay pretty far back, otherwise you will, you know, create bubbles and things that you don't really want, unless you're going for that texture look, and then by all means. So you can actually cheat and go around it a little tiny bit if you want, but you don't want to heat it up too much. Okay, so now what I'm going to use for some color is this is a watercolor gels in a spray bottle. I've moved it into a spray bottle and added some paint to it. And then this one here in a spray bottle as well is a magenta acrylic ink. So I'm going to use both of these combined with some water to add a little bit of translucent color over the top. Let me just find my paper towel. And here, before you start adding color, if you want, you could also use a tiny bit of clear gesso. You put it over the entire page. Basically what that is going to do is it's going to seal down all these pieces of paper. It is also going to give you a nice surface where you can add colors and everything to it. It does tend to make your pages a little bit stronger as well. I'm not using it on this particular piece because I don't really need it. My pages are pretty thick, and the Mod Podge creates kind of like this glossy gel to it anyways, so I don't really need it, but it also is a good step just in case you want to add a little more oomph to your page back here. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to take this watercolor gels, and I'm just going to put a little tiny bit onto my paper. And you can do this off to the side if you're worried about the color not being right or something else you don't know how it's going to work. You can pour it off to the side into a palette and then go from there. I'm pretty bold most of the time. I don't really test stuff first. I just kind of do it. So that's why I'm just putting it directly on my page. And the great thing about this is it's pretty light. So it's just adding a very, very light little bit of translucent color to that background. Because I don't want to lose all my texture and everything that's underneath with all these collage pieces. I want the layers to still show through. Okay, so the next thing that I'm going to use is my alcohol ink, which you will notice on the alcohol inks are much more vibrant. So you're going to want to use them in a little bit smaller quantities in case you're a little overwhelmed by the color. So just be aware of that. They're a lot more vibrant. And let this layer dry before you do it, okay? Now that we're dry, I'm going to go ahead and move on to that acrylic ink. And same thing, again, I'm a little bold, so I'm just going to throw some directly on my page here. And then I'm just going through with a damp paintbrush with just some regular water, and I'm kind of just getting it wet so that it spreads around a little bit easier. You can also do really cool where you do drippies down your page with it. You know, like you hold up your page like this, and then you just kind of let it drip and make drips down it. Like you can see this one is actually doing it right there. It's making drips. So that's kind of another cool texturing thing you can do if you want to do that. You just add a spot and then add some water and let it drip down your page. And the cool thing about it is it's kind of just really random. It does whatever it feels like doing. So it's a nice way to add some bright pops to it without really dragging it everywhere. It kind of does its own thing. Like, see how it kind of just went all the way down the page like that, which is kind of cool if that's what you're looking for. So I mean, it's another technique you can definitely use. I actually love drips in most of my work. Bit over here. And I picked pink in mind just so that it would kind of match some of those layers that were already in the back. It had a lot of pink color to it already. So I kind of just wanted to add that in a little tiny bit more. All right, so now that I have those two color pops on there, I'm going to give it a second to let it dry before I move on. Alrighty, so I'm going to go ahead and add in another texture layer. I'm going to do that with my brayer and just some regular acrylic. And the reason that I'm doing this is because I just want to lighten the piece back up again. It's got a lot of pink in there, and I kind of just want to pull out a little bit more of those neutral tones that are in the background. So I'm just going to spread the acrylic over the brayer. And I'm just using my finger. You could also use a paintbrush and paint it on there if you don't want to get all messy. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of roll it around on the page. And add in some texture and some more neutral color. This is also creating an entire new layer. You can also do this with just a paintbrush and some water. You can do it with just a paintbrush. You can do it with a gesso because the gesso is nice, and it's got, if you do a white gesso, it's got a really nice white color. And it's pretty thin as long as you don't do really thick layers, so it'll actually cover up but not completely cover up all your layers in the background. And then if you want, you can cover up some of those layers a little bit more than others. Like say you just want spots to go away that are in your background, like maybe it's a little too much for you right here or too much for you right here or something. You could just cover a little bit more of that with the gesso as well. It's a little bit thicker if you add bigger coats to it. And the great thing about acrylic is, the reason that I use it, because if you don't let it dry completely first, you can actually go back through with water and you can kind of change its consistency. So see how there's quite a bit of it right here? If you want, you can leave it that way, or you can go back in and just kind of spray a little tiny bit of water over the top of it, or even use a brush. And then you can go in and you can dab it off so that you get a little bit more of that color from the background in there. And you can kind of give it cool texturing as well, you know, how I just kind of brushed it off so it looks more faded. You can do that too. You can go back and roll it off. You can use it to spread it around, make it lighter. It's entirely up to you how you want to do that. You could do that with a brush as well. Either one will work just fine. You can also put some stuff on it and let it drip. That's kind of a cool thing when you go back and it's not dry yet. So I'm going to take some of this acrylic real quick. And I'm just going to play with a couple of spots, because I want them to kind of match what's on the other side here. And as you can see, I really don't care about getting messy. I actually kind of find it fun to go in there and play with my hands. It's a very sensory experience, and it's really fun to just be a kid again and get dirty and just mess with stuff that way. Okay, so I'm just going to spray them a little tiny bit here real quick. And then give them that same kind of look I did on the other side. It's kind of got a misty, whitewashed look to it now there. Okay. And then we're just going to let this dry. Okay, so I'm really loving how antique-y and vintage this is kind of coming across. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take a really old business card. And I'm just going to take some white gesso. And I'm just going to get a little tiny bit on the card. And I'm going to create a little bit more texturing. This is also creating another layer. It's forcing some of that stuff that's already on the background further into the background. And you can also get some really cool texture if you lay the card pretty flat. As you're dragging, it'll create texture over the top of some of those background things that are already textured. And then once again, when you're happy with it, you're going to go ahead and let that page dry. I cannot express how important it is to let it dry between layers, because if you don't, and you wind up adding more layers, especially something that's liquid, you're going to come out with a muddy, brown mess. You want your colors to be able to stabilize before you add more colors, okay? Okie dokie. So, hopefully you guys are enjoying the lesson so far. Hopefully you've got some really beautiful color and everything down on your page and you're really happy with it. Because I do have a very vintage look going on for mine, the last thing I am going to do to create a little tiny bit more depth is I'm going to use Distress Spray Stain, by Ranger. And I'm just going to put a little bit of dark around it just because it is a little bit bold. So I'm just going to spray a tiny bit. And the great thing about this is it can react to water as well. So I'm just going to kind of spread it around on here. And it just deepens some of those colors. And then you can go back in with your brush. This is just to kind of soften up some of those little edges so that it doesn't look so streaky. Like this one's very streaky because I use that paper towel on it. Or like this one, see how it's got like a really prominent bold line on there around the outside. I just kind of want to soften those up a little tiny bit so it makes it look more like a background than just a smudge on the front. I love these distress inks. They're so much fun because they're so reactive to water. They are so great for so many different projects. And you don't have to lighten a bunch of them down. If you like it really, really dark, go ahead and keep them. Or you could do maybe a layer of some light ones and then go back and add a little tiny bit more and make them a little darker. Those are always options. You can always add a little tiny bit more depending on what you like. Just be really careful because obviously sometimes there are things that you cannot take back off of the page once they are on there. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and let it dry. Okay, so now that our textured background is all finished, hopefully you are loving it as much as I'm loving mine. I really like that nice vintagey, girly look that it's got going on. And we're going to go ahead and move on with our next and last piece, which is actually to create a focal point on the spread. So I already know what I'm going to use for mine. It's going to be an image right here across the side and then probably some leaves and things to pull it in together. You can use anything you want. You could sketch it on there. You could paint it on there. You could Use a napkin that's got a design on it that you really like. Cut the napkin out, put it on the top, because once you get the napkin wet with the gel medium or the Mod Podge, the napkin will basically disappear and your image will just be there. If you're not really a painter or anything like that, that's, you know, a good option. You could do that, and then you could paint over the top of it, so it kind of gives you, you know, a little bit more of a guideline. If you don't want to freehand something, it's entirely up to you how you want to do it. So I'm just going to go ahead and get started on my sketch. Okay, so in case you were curious what I'm using, this is just a Prismacolor black colored pencil. And the design is actually, if anybody noticed, off of my business card that I used earlier. This is one of my earliest designs that I came up with for my logo. I have a really big thing with butterflies. I just think they're beautiful and majestic, so I use them a lot in my artwork, that and leaves and flowers and very natural elements and everything. So that's kind of where my particular sketch came from and why it was so quick and easy for me to just kind of draw on there. Now this very last step is to go ahead and we're going to color it. When I'm coloring, I want to make sure that my layers, you know, kind of come through that focal point. I typically tend to make sure they're pretty translucent. If you don't want to do that and you want it to be really opaque so that it stands out, you could do that as well. It's entirely up to you how to do it. I am going to go in here and I'm going to use some more of that alcohol ink. And then I am also going to use some shiny watercolor paints. You can use acrylics, you could use a watercolor, you could use a gouache, you could use colored pencils, you could use pastels and turn them into almost a watercolor just by adding some water to it. It's entirely up to you how you want to finish this with some color. Like I said, I'm going to use a couple of things just because I like the colors and the way that they look when it's done. So I'm going to go ahead and add those in, and we'll come back and take a look when it's all finished. And there you have it. This is my finished art journal page. One thing I want to bring up is that you might be seeing discoloration right here on my butterfly, and I just wanted to address that. It depends on what surface it is actually going over the top of, like if it's going over your gesso or if it's going over plain paper or something else. So I just want to give you a tip that if you want to make sure that everything is one solid color and you don't want to see distortion or anything like that, put another layer of clear gesso over the top of it before you start coloring and doing your sketching and everything. It'll make it more uniform and still be able to see all that cool texture and background and everything behind your sketch. Thank you so much for joining me on my art journal journey. I hope you had a great time creating your own, and we'll see you next time.